When God Was a Woman by Merlin, Chapter 3, Part 2. Ethiopia and Libya, all authority was vested in the woman. 49 years before the birth of Christ, a man from Roman Sicily wrote of his travels in northern Africa and some of the Near Eastern countries, recording his observations of people along the way. He was keenly interested in cultural patterns and was certainly one of the forerunners of the fields of anthropology and sociology. This man was known as Diodorus Sicilius, Diodorus of Sicily. Many statements reporting the high or even dominant status of women were included in his writings. We may question why he, more than any other classical writer, recorded so much information about women warriors and matriarchy and the nations all about him. He did not belittle the men who lived in such social systems that did not appear to be his aim. Indeed, he seemed to be rather admiring and respectful of the women who wielded such power. It was Diodorus who reported that the women of Ethiopia carried arms, practiced communal marriage, and raised their children so communally that they often confused even themselves as to who the natural mother had been. In parts of Libya, where the goddess Neth was highly esteemed, accounts of Amazon women still lingered even in Roman times. Diodorus described the nation in Libya as follows: all authority was vested in the woman, who discharged every kind of public duty. The men looked after domestic affairs just as the women do among ourselves, and did as they were told by their wives. They were not allowed to undertake war service or to exercise any functions of government or to fill any public office, such as might have given them more spirit to set themselves up against the women. The children were handed over immediately after birth to the men, who reared them on milk and other foods suitable to their age. Diodorus wrote of warrior women existing in Libya, reporting that these women have formed into armies which had invaded other lands. According to him, they revered the goddess as their major deity and set up sanctuaries for her worship. Though he gives no specific name, the accounts probably refer to the Libyan warrior goddess known as Neith, who was also revered under the name in Egypt. Egypt, while the husbands stay home and weave. In prehistoric Egypt, the goddess held supremacy in Upper Egypt, the south, as Nekhbet symbolized as a vulture. The people of Lower Egypt, which includes the northern Delta region, worship their supreme goddess as a cobra, using the name Wazit, Great Serpent. From about 3000 BC onward, the goddess known as Nut, Net, or Nit, probably derived from Nekhbet, was said to have existed when nothing else had yet been created. She then created all that had come into being. According to Egyptian mythology, it was she who first placed Ra, the sun god, in the sky. Other texts of Egypt tell of the goddess as Hathor in this role of creator of existence, explaining that she took the form of a serpent at that time. In Egypt, the concept of the goddess always remained vital. The introduction of male deities, just as the dynastic periods began about 3000 BC, will be more thoroughly discussed in Chapter 4. This probably lessened her original supremacy as it was known in Neolithic societies, but goddess worship continued, and, in conjunction with this, the women of Egypt appear to have benefited in many ways. Diodorus wrote a great length of the worship of the goddess Isis, the Greek translation for Auset, who had incorporated the aspects of both Wazit and Hathor. Isis was also closely associated with the goddess as Nut, who was mythologically recorded as her mother. In paintings, Isis wore the wings of Nekhbet. Diodorus explained that, according to Egyptian religion, Isis was revered as the inventor of agriculture, as a great healer and physician, and as the one who first established the laws of justice in the land. He then recorded what we today may find a most startling description of the laws of Egypt, explaining that they were the result of the reverence paid to this mighty goddess. He wrote, "It is for these reasons, in fact, that it was ordained that the queen should have greater power and honor than the king, and that among private persons the wife should enjoy authority over the husband. Husbands agreeing in the marriage contract that they will be obedient in all things to their wives." Fraser commented on the relationship between the veneration of Isis and the customs of female kinship and stated that, in Egypt, the archaic system of mother kin, with its preference for women over men in matters of property and inheritance, lasted down to Roman times. There is further evidence that Egypt was a land where women had great freedom and control of their own lives, and perhaps of their husbands as well. Herodotus of Greece, several centuries before Diodorus, wrote that in Egypt, women go into the marketplace, transact affairs, and occupy themselves with business, while the husbands stay home and weave. His contemporary, Sophocles, stated that their thoughts and actions are all modeled on Egyptian ways, for there the men sit at the loom indoors while the wives work abroad for their daily bread. Professor Cyrus Gordon wrote in 1953 of Life in Ancient Egypt. He tells us that in family life, women had a peculiarly important position for inheritance passed through the mother rather than through the father. This system may well hark back to prehistoric times when only the obvious relationship between mother and child was recognized, but not the less apparent relationship between father and child. Dr. Murray suggested that women's condition was high due perhaps to their economic independence. S.W. Barron writes that in Egyptian papyri, many women appear as parties in civil litigations and independent business transactions, even with their own husbands and fathers. One of the earliest archaeologists of the pyramids of Egypt, Sir William Findler's Petrie, wrote in 1925 that in Egypt all property went in the female line. The woman was the mistress of the house, and in early tales, she is represented as having entire control of herself in the place. Discussing the position of women in ancient Egypt, theologian and archaeologist Roland de Vaux wrote in 1965 that in Egypt, the wife was often the head of the family, with all the rights such as position entailed. Obedience was urged upon husbands in the maxims of Ptah-hotep. Marriage contracts of all periods attest the extremely independent social and economic position of women. According to E. Meyer, who is quoted in the Varetting Study, among the Egyptians, the women were remarkably free. As late as the 4th century BC, there existed side by side with patriarchal marriage, a form of marriage in which the wife chose the husband and could divorce him on payment of compensation. Love poems discovered in Egyptian tombs strongly hint that it was the Egyptian women who did the courting, oftentimes wooing the male by plying him with intoxicants to weaken his protestations. Robert Bifrost wrote of Egyptian women clerk who later became a governor and eventually the commander-in-chief of an army. A most enlightening and significant study on the social structure and position of women in Egypt was done in 1949 by Margaret Murray. Painstakingly tracing the lineage of royal families in Egypt, she eventually proved that, at the level of royalty, The Egyptian culture at most periods was matrilineal. Royalty was studied because records for these people were most available. According to Murray, it was the daughters, not the sons, who were the actual inheritors of the royal throne. She suggests that the custom of brother-sister marriage then developed, allowing a son to gain access to the royal privilege in this way. She writes that the matrilineal right to the throne was the reason that Egyptian princesses for so many centuries were married within the family and were not available for international marriage alliances. This may clarify why the goddess Isis, who Fraser stated was a more important deity than her brother husband Osiris, and whom Diodorus cited as the origin of the generally high position of women in Egypt, was known as the throne. But even in Egypt, women were slowly losing their prestigious position. Sir Flinders Petrie, incidentally, a deeply respected colleague of Dr. Murray's at the University of London, discussed the role of priestesses in ancient Egypt. He pointed out how their position had changed between the time of the earliest dynasties, 3000 BC onward, to the 18th dynasty, 1570 to 1300 BC. According to the available records, the goddess known as Hathor, much the same deity as Isis, was in earliest times served by 61 priestesses and 18 priests, while the goddess known as Neith was attended solely by priestesses. By the time of the 18th dynasty, women were no longer even part of the religious clergy, but served only as temple musicians. It is in the 18th dynasty that Egypt was made to feel the greatest influence of the Indo-Europeans, a factor again discussed at greater length in chapters 4 and 5. Incidentally, the use of the word pharaoh, generally summing up images even more powerful than the word king, actually comes from the term par-ro, which literally means great house. It was only from the time of the 18th dynasty that the word was used to signify the royal male of that household.